My parents beat me in front of my daughter because I refused to pay my brother's rent. My name is Elena Whitman, and the day my parents hit me in front of my daughter was the day I stopped being their victim. It sounds unreal, doesn't it? A grown woman, 36 years old, a registered nurse, a single mother, standing in her own living room bruised and bleeding because her parents believed they still had a right to control her, and when they couldn't, they used their hands. But it didn't start like that. Abuse never walks in waving a flag. It creeps in as entitlement. It wears the disguise of family loyalty. It starts with guilt-tripping phone calls and ends with your child crying in a locked bedroom. That morning was just like any other. I had just returned from working the night shift at Denver General Hospital, trying not to wake Sophie, my 9-year-old daughter. She was my whole world, smart, gentle, curious. I made her lunch, packed her school bag, kissed her forehead. She never liked it when I worked nights, but she never complained. She understood. I was just starting to relax with a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. "Derek's rent is due. You know what to do." "Mom." No greeting, no question, just an order. I stared at it. Then I put the phone down without replying. My hands were still trembling from the emergency room shift. A drunk driver had flipped a truck, a teenage girl coded twice. I had just paid off Sophie's dental surgery. My bank account barely survived it, and yet they expected me to clean up Derek's mess again. My younger brother Derek hadn't held a job longer than 6 weeks since college, but he had always been the golden child. Mom's baby, Dad's only son. While I worked 14-hour shifts, Derek played poker, leased sports cars he couldn't afford, and kept moving from one girlfriend's couch to the next. And still my parents saw him as the victim. When I didn't respond to the message, I figured that was the end of it, at least for the day. I was wrong. 2 hours later, they were banging on my front door like debt collectors. No warning, no courtesy. Sophie was still in her pajamas, drawing at the kitchen table. She looked up startled. "Grandma and Grandpa!" I opened the door and my mother pushed past me like she owned the place. My father stood behind her arms, crossed eyes narrowed with disdain. "Why didn't you answer your mother's text?" he barked. "Because I have nothing to say," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I already told you last month I can't pay Derek's rent anymore." "Oh, so your daughter's dentist is more important than your brother having a roof over his head?" he sneered. I took a deep breath. Yes, because she's a child. My child. And he's a grown man who refuses to work. That was all it took. My mother's face twisted with rage. She screamed, "You think you're better than us now," and then she hit me. Her purse flew across the room. Her hand followed, slapping me so hard my head jerked sideways. I stumbled back, hitting the edge of the bookshelf. My vision blurred. I felt warm liquid drip near my eyebrow. Sophie screamed, "Mom." She ran toward me, but my mother stepped in her path. "Stay out of this, little girl," she hissed. "Maybe if your mother listened like Derek does, she wouldn't need to be punished." Punished. That word echoed in my chest. Like I was 13 again and grounded for saying no. Like I was 6 and dared to question why Derek got more food. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a mother. And my daughter was watching. I stood up, slowly shaking. "You need to leave," I said, teeth clenched. "We'll leave," my father growled, "when you wire the money. Until then, we're not going anywhere." They dropped onto my couch like they owned it. My blood dripped onto the hardwood floor. Sophie cried in the corner. I felt frozen, trapped between who I was and who I needed to become. But in that moment, I knew something had snapped. If you've ever been treated like your worth is conditional, that your love comes with a debt you didn't sign up for, hit the like button. Let's walk through this together. Because what I did next wasn't out of anger. It was out of survival. I didn't sleep that night. Sophie lay curled up beside me in bed, one hand still clinging to mine long after she'd fallen asleep. Her sketchpad was tucked under her pillow. She hadn't drawn a single thing since they left. That more than anything broke me. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the refrigerator hum, the occasional creak in the floorboards, and the silence where my courage used to be. I couldn't shake the look in her eyes when my mother raised her hand. That mixture of fear and confusion. She didn't cry for herself. She cried for me. And maybe for the truth she now saw. At around 2 a.m., I got out of bed. I went to the bathroom and stared at my face in the mirror. The swelling on my cheek had turned a deep red purple. My left eye was puffy, the cut on my temple had dried but looked angry and raw. For years I'd told myself this was normal. That family comes with friction. That if I just kept the peace, everyone would be okay. But what about me? What about Sophie? She saw everything. She saw me get hurt and say nothing. She saw me give and give until I bled literally and still be told I wasn't enough. I couldn't let her grow up thinking that was love. The next morning, after dropping Sophie off at school, her hand hesitant as she let go of mine, I drove straight to the courthouse. I didn't even go home to change. I walked in wearing last night's sweater and a bruise under my eye. The clerk didn't flinch. She handed me the forms like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Restraining order. I filled it out with a shaking pen. I wrote, "They entered my home without consent. They struck me in front of my child. They refused to leave unless I transferred money. I am afraid for my safety and my daughter's emotional well-being." A female officer came out to speak with me. She looked at me, really looked. "You did the right thing," she said simply. And that's when it hit me I had done something right. For once, I chose myself. I chose Sophie. But I wasn't done yet. On the way home, I made one more stop, a building I hadn't visited in nearly a year. A quiet office on the 3rd floor of a brick complex just outside the city. The nameplate on the door read, Whitman Capital Holdings, LLC. It was mine. Well, technically, it was an LLC I set up 2 years ago after a freelance consulting gig with a silent investor who believed in me. I used my savings, my bonuses, and everything extra I had scraped together to quietly purchase a foreclosed home. A house that meant something to me. The house I grew up in. The one my parents were now renting. They never asked who the new landlord was. They never cared. They just paid their rent inconsistently at best, and assumed the world still bent around their entitlement. But I knew every payment they skipped. I saw every missed deadline, every late fee they ignored. And now I was going to do something they'd never expect. I was going to make them feel powerless, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. It wasn't about getting even. It was about reclaiming space. Reclaiming the girl who once hid in closets to avoid being yelled at. Reclaiming the mother who stood bloody in her own living room and still stayed silent. That girl, that woman, deserved a voice. And this was how I would give it to her. If you've ever had to choose between protecting yourself and pleasing your family, and you chose yourself, drop a comment. I'd love to know I'm not alone. Because that day I didn't just file a restraining order. I opened a door I had locked for years. And I was ready to walk through it. 3 days after filing the restraining order, I sat in my car outside Sophie's elementary school, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the building as kids streamed out. It was a bright spring afternoon, the kind that smelled like possibility. But I didn't feel light. I felt electric, charged. Like something enormous had shifted inside me and I hadn't figured out how to carry it yet. Sophie came running toward the car, her ponytail bouncing, her smile a little hesitant. She slid into the back seat, buckled herself, and looked at me in the mirror. "Are they coming back?" she asked. "No," I said, voice steady. "They're not allowed to." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay." It was such a small word, but it felt like a breath held between us finally being released. That night, after she went to bed, I opened my laptop and began drafting the eviction notice. The house my parents were renting wasn't just a property to me. It was memory. It was layered with invisible scars and unspoken moments. It was the hallway where I once overheard my father say, "She's too emotional to ever make it in life." It was the kitchen where my mother slammed the phone after I got my nursing scholarship and told me, "Don't expect us to clap for you." But now it was mine. And they hadn't paid rent in 3 months. The property manager had sent multiple warnings. I told her to hold off this time. I wanted to handle it personally. I wanted to be the one to place the boundary they had never respected. I printed the letter, signed it, and had it sent by certified mail the next morning. 30 days. That's what the notice said. They had 30 days to vacate. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel angry. I felt precise, intentional, like a surgeon making the first cut before the healing could begin. That night, I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the porch, and watched the sun lower over the edge of the neighborhood. I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about Derek, and then my phone buzzed. It was him. Derek heard. "You're being dramatic again. What, no rent this time? Too busy playing single mom superhero?" I didn't reply. Derek. "You know, you're the reason Mom's stressed out. She's worried sick. Dad says you're spiraling." Still, I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and archived the messages, because I knew exactly what would happen next. My parents would deny spin cry to extended relatives and try to reframe me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter, the unstable nurse, the bitter woman jealous of her brother. They'd done it before. But this time I wasn't giving them an audience. I logged off my phone and opened a book, something I hadn't done in weeks. I sat in the quiet, Sophie asleep down the hall, and for the first time in what felt like years, I let silence be safety. There was no yelling, no lectures. Just me, my breath, and the knowledge that I had finally taken a step they couldn't undo. If you've ever sent a message or written a letter or made a call that changed everything, even when your hands were shaking, just know I see you, and I'm proud of you. Because the moment I mailed that letter, I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a landlord, I was a mother, and I was finally free. The eviction letter hit harder than I expected, but not for me, for them. The next morning, while making Sophie's lunch, my phone lit up with a barrage of calls from an unknown number. Then another from my mom's friend, then my aunt in Arizona, people I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't answer any of them. I already knew what the calls were about. But when my mother finally called from her own number, I picked up. I needed to hear how far they'd fall to keep the illusion of power alive. Her voice was already cracking. "Elena, how could you—" I stayed silent. "We're your parents. You're throwing us out like garbage." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, watching Sophie nibble her cereal, completely unaware of the storm behind my quiet stare. "I was garbage to you the day you raised your hand against me," I said. "The day you made my daughter watch her mother bleed." She gasped. "We didn't mean—" I cut her off. "That was the moment I stopped being your daughter. That's when I became your landlord." There was a pause and then a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Elena. You're turning your back on family." "No," I said, calm now. "I'm turning my back on abuse." And I hung up. They still had 29 days. But I knew how this would unfold. They wouldn't beg. They'd fight. They'd manipulate guilt-trip spin lies and weave stories of betrayal. They would weaponize the idea of family until it snapped back like a whip. I was ready. That afternoon, I stopped by the property manager's office to confirm everything was in place. She looked surprised when I said I wanted to deliver the second notice by hand. "You sure?" she asked, eyeing the fresh yellowing on my jaw. "Very," I said. "This time I want them to know I see them, and I'm not afraid." And I wasn't. That night, Sophie asked if she could stay up and paint. She hadn't touched her brushes in days. I watched her choose colors lavender, teal, and gold. She painted a small house with 2 stick figures under a bright sun. "That's us," she said, smiling shyly. "Just me and you." My eyes stung. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "That's all we need, baby." Right then, another text came in from Derek. "Derek, you seriously kicked them out. What's wrong with you?" "Derek, you're sick. Mom's crying nonstop. Dad says you've lost your mind." I stared at the screen, and then finally I replied, "Me, you weren't there when they hit me, when they made Sophie cry. Don't text me again." Seconds later, he responded with a single word, "Ungrateful." I blocked the number. That was the moment I knew, truly knew, that this wasn't just a chapter. It was a rebirth. And if you've ever had to block your own blood to breathe again, if you've chosen peace over performance, let me know where you're watching this from. Maybe we've walked the same road. Maybe you're still walking it. But I promise, the air gets lighter. The next morning, I woke up early dressed in jeans and a clean white sweater and drove to the house I grew up in, the one they were about to lose. I held the envelope tight in my hand, my name now at the bottom, not as a child asking for love, but as the woman demanding dignity. The driveway was almost exactly as I remembered it, cracked in the same places, weeds sprouting through the edges. But the porch swing that once held summer memories now hung rusted and still. I stood across the street for a long moment watching shadows move behind the curtains, wondering if they knew I was here. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for closure. I crossed the street slowly, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. The letter was tucked neatly inside a manila envelope marked with the official 30-day eviction warning. It felt heavier than it should have, not the paper, but what it meant. I knocked firmly. No more waiting. The door swung open too fast. My father stood in the frame, still wearing that old flannel shirt he always claimed was lucky. His face twisted the moment he saw me. "You're not welcome here," he snapped. "I own the house," I said calmly. "So I think I am." He sneered. "This is still our home. We raised you here." "You raised me to believe pain was love," I replied. That silence was respect. "I'm done with that story." He stepped forward, chest-puffed, eyes blazing, but I didn't move. I held out the envelope. "You're being evicted," I said. 30 days. This isn't a negotiation." He didn't take it. "Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know," I said. "But maybe Derek can finally carry something for once." A voice called from behind him. My mother. "Elena?" She appeared beside him, her voice quieter than his but edged with panic. "We're your family." "No," I said, and this time the word didn't sting. "You were the people who should have protected me, and instead you taught me that I was only valuable when I was useful." I dropped the envelope on the doorstep. "We have nowhere," she whispered. I looked past them. The living room hadn't changed. The same beige sofa, the same dull carpet. It was a tomb of their control preserved in false comfort. "Then now you'll know what it's like to have no one fight for you," I said. Behind me, a car door opened. Sophie. She had asked to come, and I let her. She stood beside me now, silent but steady, her hand brushing mine. "My mother saw her." "You brought her here. You're poisoning her." "No," I said, turning slightly. "You did that when you made her watch you hit me." There was a moment, a flicker of something like shame in my mother's eyes, but it passed. "I hope you can live with yourself," my father said bitterly. I said, for the first time. And with that, I turned and walked back to the car with Sophie. Neither of us looked back. If you've ever walked away from people who made you question your worth, even when they shared your blood, you know how heavy those steps can feel. But sometimes the heaviest steps are also the most necessary. That day, I walked out of a house I no longer called home and into a life that was finally mine. The drive home that day was quiet but not uncomfortable. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, unusually calm for a 9-year-old who had just witnessed her mother confront the people who once raised her. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her tiny fingers rested on the envelope in my lap like she understood what it meant, even without reading the words. "Do you think they'll leave?" she asked after a while. I glanced at her, then back at the road. "They'll have to." She nodded once, accepting it like a truth she'd always known. That night, I tucked her in and lingered a little longer than usual at her bedside. She had fallen asleep holding her paintbrush. On the floor by her desk, I noticed her latest painting. It was of a woman, tall and strong, holding the hand of a smaller girl. Behind them was a house drawn in warm browns and yellows with flowers blooming at its base, and a sun that took up half the sky. That was her way of telling me, "We're going to be okay." And I believed her. The next few days passed like a strange dream. I went to work. I made lunches. I paid bills. But something in the air felt different. Lighter. I didn't hear from my parents. Not directly anyway. Instead, the whispers began. First a message from my Aunt Rachel, then a voicemail from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them delivered some variation of the same script. They're heartbroken. They're confused. They don't understand why you're doing this. You know how your parents are. I didn't respond, because I did know how they were. I knew how my mother cried when she didn't get her way, how my father sulked when he wasn't worshipped, how Derek disappeared conveniently whenever the spotlight grew too hot. They had built their power on guilt, on my silence, on the belief that I would never dare push back. And now that I had, they were flailing. The tipping point came when I received an email from the property manager with attached photos, uncollected garbage piling in the backyard, mail left open on the steps, a torn screen door that had clearly been yanked off in anger. "They're letting the place go," the message read. I sat with that image for a long time. They were destroying the house I had saved to buy, the house I had hoped might become something new, maybe even a rental for another family someday, a place for healing. But they couldn't even respect that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back and throw every piece of broken furniture into the street. But I didn't. Because part of reclaiming your peace means learning not to chase every fire they light. So instead, I filed a damage report with the management company and booked a home inspection for the week after their move-out deadline. I would deal with the aftermath, but on my terms. No yelling, no tears, no drama. Just action. If you've ever had to fight for a space that was rightfully yours emotionally or physically, then you understand. Sometimes you have to let people show you exactly who they are before you can finally walk away without carrying their weight. And in that weightless space, you begin to rise. 1 week before the move-out deadline, I received a text from Derek. It was short, abrupt, almost like he didn't even mean to send it. "Heard you bought the house. Classic move. Hope the power trip was worth it." I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked my phone and dropped it onto the counter. I wasn't going to respond. What could I possibly say that would make a difference? My silence said more than my words ever could. Besides, by now I understood something fundamental. People like Derek don't want resolution. They want reaction. They thrive on chaos and they feed on the emotional aftermath. But I was done serving myself up. That night, I sat on the back porch with a cup of mint tea and watched Sophie chase fireflies across the small yard. She laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. It was the kind of sound that filled you, the kind that made you forget just how heavy life had been. "Mom," she called. "Can we paint the new house lavender?" I smiled. "We can paint it any color you want." She beamed and went back to running. That moment, quiet, full of possibility, reminded me why I had done all of this, why I had chosen conflict over comfort, why I had walked away from blood ties that felt more like binding chains. I wasn't just protecting her future, I was rewriting mine. 3 days later, the eviction notice was due to be enforced. I checked in with the property manager and she confirmed it. My parents still hadn't packed. "They're waiting for something," she said. "Maybe someone to step in." I knew they were hoping for me, but I wasn't coming. Instead, I began preparing for our move. I had found a small bungalow just 2 blocks from Sophie's school. It wasn't flashy, 2 bedrooms, a sunlit kitchen, a yard just big enough for a swing set. But it was ours, fully paid off, no shared walls, no lingering ghosts. I hired movers, scheduled internet installation, and took Sophie to pick out new paint colors for her room. She chose sky blue with silver stars. "It'll feel like I'm sleeping under the sky," she said. She didn't ask once about my parents. But then the night before the eviction, she came into the living room while I was labeling boxes. "Are you scared?" she asked. I looked up. Her eyes were wide, curious, not anxious, just wanting honesty. "No," I said, "I'm ready." She nodded thoughtfully. "Can I come tomorrow?" I paused. Part of me wanted to say no, to shield her. But then I remembered how she had watched me break, how she had seen the worst of it. Maybe it was time she saw the end of it too. "Yes," I said, "you can come." She reached over and hugged me. No words, just warmth. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life in front of your child, piece by piece, while trying to be strong and soft at the same time, tell me, how did you find your courage? Drop it in the comments. Someone out there might need your story today. That night, I barely slept. Not out of fear but anticipation. Because tomorrow everything would finally end. And I'd be there to see it. The morning of the eviction, I woke up before sunrise. Sophie was still asleep, curled beneath her lavender blanket, her sketch pad beside her pillow as always. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and stared out the window, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. Porch lights flicking on sprinklers, clicking on lawns, the distant hum of a school bus engine. Today was the day. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. If anything, I felt still. There's something strange about watching a chapter end when so much of you has already moved past it. I'd made peace with my decision, and yet the finality of it still carried a weight. By 8 o'clock, Sophie was up and dressed, her backpack slung over one shoulder, sketch pad poking out the top. She wore her favorite jacket, the one with stars on the sleeves, and her hair in 2 tight braids. "You sure?" I asked gently. She nodded. "I want to see." We drove in silence to the house I used to call home, the one I now legally owned. As we turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of the front yard, and my breath caught. It looked like a yard sale gone wrong. Plastic bags piled along the sidewalk. A stained recliner overturned in the grass. My mother's beloved patio swing was rusting at its base, half buried under a stack of boxes. The front door hung open, and standing just beyond the porch, pacing like a restless animal, was my father. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sophie looked at me. "It's okay," she said. "I've got you." I nodded. We parked across the street. For a moment, I hesitated, watching the scene unfold from behind the windshield like a movie I no longer wanted to be part of. Then I stepped out. Sophie followed, her small hand slipping into mine. We crossed the street slowly, the gravel crunching under our shoes. My father saw us first. His face twisted, not in surprise, but in pure, unfiltered rage. "You came to watch," he spat. "I came to make sure it's done," I replied calmly. My mother appeared at the doorway, dragging a suitcase behind her. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her cheeks sunken with sleeplessness. "Elena," she said, her voice sharp and cracked. "You can't be serious. We're your family." "You were supposed to protect me," I said. "You were supposed to protect her." I motioned toward Sophie, who stood tall beside me, unflinching. "She doesn't need to grow up thinking that abuse is love. I'm breaking that cycle. Today." My father took a step forward, eyes blazing. "You think money makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "But it made me independent. And brave. And finally free of you." He reached for my arm, that same old move, the one that used to make me flinch. This time I didn't move. "Touch me again," I said, "and the police will be here before you blink." He stopped. And something in his eyes shifted, not anger, not hate, but realization. He couldn't control me anymore. Sophie stepped forward, then her voice quiet but clear. "You lied about love," she said to both of them. My mother's lip trembled, but she said nothing. She never did. We stood there for a few seconds more. Then I turned to Sophie and whispered, "Let's go." And we walked away. If you've ever had to stand in front of your past and say, "No more, I see you," and if you haven't yet, I hope you know you can. You will. We didn't look back. I held Sophie's hand tightly as we walked back to the car. The street felt different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. Every step away from that house was like peeling off a layer I'd been forced to wear my entire life. It no longer fit. And I wasn't going to carry it into our future. We drove home in silence. Sophie flipped through her sketch pad in the back seat. I glanced at her through the mirror. She wasn't scared. She wasn't confused. She looked steady, like she'd just witnessed something important and understood it in a way only children who've seen too much too soon can. Later that afternoon, I took her to pick out curtains for her new room. She chose light purple with tiny silver stars, the same ones she had drawn in nearly every painting for the last month. "Can we put them up before we move in?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "We'll hang them first thing." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I got a text from my cousin Josh. We hadn't spoken in years. He was neutral in all this, not close to my parents, not particularly fond of Derek, but always pleasant when we crossed paths at family gatherings. Josh heard about what happened. Just wanted to say, good for you. Took guts. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed 2 words, thank you. It was the only response I needed. I hadn't told anyone outside of our immediate circle what I'd done. There were no dramatic social media posts, no letters sent to the extended family. But the news had traveled anyway, like it always does in families where gossip is currency. I'd been painted as cold, selfish, cruel. Let them think what they want. Because the truth, the real story, lived with me and Sophie, and anyone who wanted to know it was welcome to ask. But I wouldn't explain myself to those who had only ever shown up to take sides. Later that night, while tucking Sophie in, she turned to me and whispered, "Are we safe now?" I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "We are." She nodded, then rolled onto her side. Within minutes, she was asleep. I stood there for a while, watching her breathe, listening to the small creaks of our temporary place. The place we would soon leave behind for something better. And I thought about the word safe, how foreign it had felt for most of my life, how safety in my family always came with conditions. Silence, obedience, sacrifice. Not anymore. If you're watching this and you've ever had to create safety from scratch for yourself, for your child, for someone you love, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Your story matters more than you know, because we all deserve safety. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is give it to ourselves when no one else will. A week after the eviction, Sophie and I moved into our new home. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect in the quietest, most essential ways. A small 2-bedroom house on a quiet, tree-lined street, just a short walk from Sophie's school. The front yard had a patch of grass big enough for her to run barefoot in the summer. The backyard had space for a garden and a wooden fence wrapped around it like an embrace. We painted her room first sky blue with silver star decals that glowed at night. She taped her drawings along the wall and arranged her books on the little shelf by the window. Watching her move around the space like it was already hers filled me with a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. This wasn't just a house, it was a clean start. Our first dinner in the new place was simple mac and cheese on paper plates, sitting on the floor of an unfurnished living room. We laughed when Sophie spilled juice and used a dish towel as a napkin. We didn't need furniture. We had space. We had quiet. We had each other. The next morning, I received a voicemail from my aunt, the only family member who hadn't taken sides, hadn't reached out to scold or shame. "Elena, I just wanted you to know. Your parents are staying in an apartment above a closed-down nail salon on 11th. Derek's not with them. He left for Arizona. Apparently, he maxed out their credit cards and vanished." I listened to the message twice. Not because I was surprised, but because I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, just a sense of completion. This was the natural consequence of choices they made long before I ever acted. I wasn't the villain. I was simply the one who finally said no. Sophie and I settled into a rhythm quickly. School drop-offs, morning walks, grocery trips where she got to choose her favorite cereal, something so small, but once dictated by others. I even bought her a swing for the backyard. She chose purple ropes and a wooden seat. Every evening she'd swing under the fading light while I sat nearby with a book and tea in hand. One afternoon she came running up to me with her sketch pad. "I made a new picture," she said, flipping it around. It was a drawing of a small house with 2 stick figures and the words, "Home means peace," written above it in marker. I didn't cry, not then. But when she turned away to hang it on the fridge, I placed my hand over my heart and breathed in something I hadn't in years. Safety, wholeness, joy. And that night, I finally unpacked the last box labeled "Old Letters." I didn't open them. I just tucked them away in the back of the closet. Because I wasn't defined by those stories anymore. We were writing new ones now. The first time I saw my parents again was by accident. Sophie and I were walking through the local farmer's market one Saturday morning, something we'd started doing every weekend since we moved. She loved the homemade jams and the woman who sold painted birdhouses near the fountain. It was our new tradition, something just for us. We had just finished picking out a bunch of fresh sunflowers when I turned and nearly collided with them. My mother looked older, thinner. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a sweatshirt that swallowed her frame. My father was a step behind, pulling a plastic grocery bag that sagged under the weight of what little they could afford. They stopped in their tracks the moment they saw me, or more accurately, saw Sophie. Her grip on my hand tightened. "Elena," my mother said, voice almost too low to hear. "Mom," I replied evenly. We stood there for a second too long. Strangers bustled around us, oblivious to the silent war waging in the middle of a market stall. "You look well," she said. I answered. There was a pause. Then she looked at Sophie. "She's grown." Sophie didn't say a word. She didn't need to. My father cleared his throat. "You've made your point. You won." That made me blink. "This was never about winning," I said. "It was about surviving." He rolled his eyes. "You always did think you were better than us." "No," I said, "I thought I had to earn your love by bleeding for it." And I stopped. I could feel Sophie looking up at me, taking in every word. "You destroyed our family," my mother whispered. I stepped forward just enough to let the words hit clean. "No." I exposed what was already broken. I just stopped pretending. She flinched. My father stayed silent. And for the first time, I saw it, not regret, not sorrow, but the raw, open wound of losing control. They weren't angry because I'd hurt them. They were angry because I'd stopped letting them hurt me. If you've ever looked into the eyes of someone who once made you feel small and stood your ground anyway, tell me how that moment changed you. Leave a comment below. Your voice matters here. I turned to Sophie and smiled softly. "Ready to pick out a birdhouse?" She nodded. We walked away without another glance, sunflowers bouncing with each step. That afternoon, we painted the birdhouse lavender and hung it in the backyard near her swing. She insisted we add tiny stars on the roof. "So the birds know they're safe too," she said. I stared at her, this little soul who had seen so much, and felt the deepest kind of pride. We were building something new. Not just a home, but a legacy of safety, choice, and truth. And we weren't looking back. A few weeks after that encounter at the farmer's market, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, just my name written in my mother's careful, old-fashioned script. For a moment, I debated whether to open it. My fingers hovered over the envelope's flap heart, caught between curiosity and self-preservation. Eventually, I opened it, not because I needed to hear what she had to say, but because I needed to confirm that I no longer feared her voice. The letter was 5 pages long. It began with what looked like an apology, though not quite. More of a justification wrapped in nostalgic memories. "Remember when you had strep throat in 5th grade and I made you soup? Remember your prom night when I stayed up until you got home?" It listed every good deed she had ever done, like a tally sheet meant to outweigh a lifetime of emotional debt. By the 3rd page, the tone shifted: pity, blame, a subtle twist of the knife. "You've always been so sensitive. You've misremembered so much. We did the best we could." And finally, the closing paragraph. "You'll regret pushing your family away. You'll realize one day that blood is all you have when the world gets cold." I folded the letter slowly and slid it back into the envelope. Then I walked outside and fed it to the fire pit. The flames curled around the paper as if it had been waiting for this moment, as if the words themselves knew they didn't belong in our future. Inside, Sophie was painting at the kitchen table. I could hear the soft strokes of her brush, the quiet hum of her favorite music playing on the little speaker. This was the world we were building. Not a fortress of pain and guilt, but a sanctuary of creativity and truth. Later that night, I told Sophie about the letter in the simplest terms possible. "She wrote to me," I said, "but it didn't change anything." Sophie looked up from her sketchpad, thoughtful. "Did she say she was sorry?" I hesitated. "Not really," she nodded. "That's okay, we don't need it." And just like that, I realized she was right. We didn't need closure in the form of an apology. We didn't need a perfect ending. We just needed distance, the kind that allowed us to breathe, to grow, to dream without limits. I spent the rest of that evening organizing Sophie's art supplies, framing a few of her favorite drawings and hanging them up in the hallway. Our hallway. One picture showed the two of us holding hands standing in front of a house with a giant sun beaming overhead. Above it, she had written, "We chose peace." I stopped and stared at those words. We chose peace. Not because it was handed to us, not because someone apologized, but because we fought for it. Because we decided we were worthy of it. And that was enough. The seasons began to shift. Late spring melted into early summer, and the days grew longer. Sophie spent more time outside barefoot in the grass, chasing light with a joy that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep inside her. The new house became not just a space we lived in, but a place that started to reflect us in every framed drawing, every lavender bloom we planted along the fence. One Sunday morning, I found her sitting on the porch, her sketch pad open across her lap. "I think I'm going to paint a mural," she said. "Oh yeah, where?" "On the backyard fence. Big stars, and birds, and a swing in the corner." I smiled. "That sounds beautiful. It's going to be called Where the Brave Live." My chest tightened in the best way. "I think that's perfect." She had no idea how much weight those words carried. Later that week, while putting away groceries, I got another message, this time from a distant cousin who worked in real estate. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. She had no stake in the drama, which made her message feel more grounded, more curious. "Hey, just heard about everything. Your parents are staying in a one-bedroom above a closed nail salon on East 11th. Derek's nowhere to be found. Apparently drained their savings. Word is they're trying to rent a trailer outside town." I stared at the screen for a long moment. It wasn't that I was surprised. It was that I felt nothing. No rage, no pity, just distance. The kind that comes not from geography, but from growth. They had burned every bridge, including the ones I kept rebuilding over and over at my own emotional expense. And now, there was nothing left to cross. I didn't reply to my cousin. Instead, I picked up my phone and opened my gallery. I scrolled to a picture I had taken the previous evening, Sophie on her new swing, the sky behind her painted in hues of orange and pink, her legs flying upward like she could touch the clouds. I posted the photo with a simple caption, "We don't live in fear anymore." And we didn't. If you've ever had to draw a line not out of anger, but out of self-respect, and found peace waiting on the other side, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. Because someone else might need that reminder today, you are allowed to protect your peace. Later that night, as Sophie drifted to sleep, I stepped outside and looked at the fence where she'd soon begin her mural. The blank wood panels looked like pages waiting to be filled, not with the echoes of old stories, but with new colors, new beginnings. I didn't need anyone's permission. I didn't need closure from those who'd never understand. All I needed was right here, my daughter, our little home, and the silence that no longer scared me. Only one thing remained now, not revenge, not retribution, but reflection. And a promise to never let fear wear the mask of family again. A few days later, Sophie asked me something I hadn't expected. "Will we ever see them again?" We were sitting on the floor of her room sorting through a box of old photos. Most were from her school projects, birthday parties, vacations we scraped together when I could afford a few days off. But tucked between those memories were older ones I hadn't seen in years. There was a picture of me at 16, awkward and smiling, standing next to my mother in our old backyard. My father had taken the photo. I could still remember the way he barked at me to stop blinking. How my mother smiled just a second too late. I held the photo in my hand, torn between a pang of nostalgia and the aching truth of what followed that year. I set it aside. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not now." "Would you let them back in?" I paused. The question was heavier than her voice let on. "Only if they changed, really changed. And even then we'd have to decide together." She nodded, thoughtful. There was something about the way she asked, not afraid, not hopeful, just curious. Like she was collecting pieces of the story for herself, figuring out how to hold them without letting them hurt. Later that night, I pulled out my journal, something I hadn't written in since before the eviction. I sat at the kitchen table and opened to a fresh page. June 18th. I don't miss them. Not the yelling. Not the demands. Not the constant feeling that I wasn't enough. But there are slivers, strange, small moments when I remember a soft hand brushing my hair, or the smell of Mom's lasagna, or the way Dad once carried me to bed when I fell asleep in the car. And those moments make it harder, not easier, because they almost convince you that everything else was forgivable. But it wasn't. And I have to keep reminding myself the good memories don't erase the harm, they just complicate it. But Sophie, she's growing up with clarity, with truth, with love that doesn't require pain as proof. And that's what I hold on to. I closed the journal feeling lighter than I had in days. Sometimes healing doesn't come with a grand finale. Sometimes it's just sitting with your truth and not needing it to be pretty. The next morning, I found Sophie on the porch painting the first stars on her mural. Her brush moved slowly, deliberately, as if each shape carried meaning. "Do you want to help?" she asked. I picked up a second brush. Together, we painted the sky. The mural took us 5 days to finish. We worked on it each afternoon after school and work in that golden stretch of time when the sun dipped low and the air felt soft. Sophie chose every color herself, purples, blues, silvers, and bursts of warm yellow. She painted birds flying in all directions, a swing set in the corner, and dozens of stars that shimmered under the daylight and glowed faintly under moonlight. Near the bottom left, she painted 2 figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. Above them, in her careful handwriting, she wrote, "Where the brave live." I didn't say anything when I saw it. I couldn't. Instead, I walked into the house, filled a thermos with chamomile tea, and brought it back out. We sat on the porch steps together, paint-streaked and barefoot, watching our work dry. "Do you think they ever wonder where we went?" Sophie asked suddenly. I took a sip of tea. "Maybe, but I think they're more concerned with who stayed." She nodded. "I don't miss them." "I know," I said, "and that's okay." She leaned against my shoulder. "Do you?" I paused. The truth didn't come easily, not because I didn't know it, but because I'd spent years trying to rewrite it. "I miss what I hoped they could be," I said finally, "but not who they actually were." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's kind of like missing a book you never finished because the story turned out bad." I smiled. Exactly like that. We stayed there until the fireflies came out. The next morning, I found a letter in our mailbox, not from my parents, not from Derek, but from a neighbor down the street. It was handwritten on thick stationery and sealed with a blue sticker. It read, "I've watched you and your daughter paint that mural every evening. I just wanted you to know it's the most beautiful thing I've seen on this street in years. It looks like freedom. No name, no return address, just those words." It hit me harder than any apology ever could, because sometimes healing doesn't come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from strangers who witness your quiet courage and recognize it as strength. That afternoon, I printed out a copy of Sophie's mural and framed it in the hallway. Right above it, I wrote 3 words in block letters. Peace was chosen, not begged for, not handed down, chosen by me, for us. If you're watching this and wondering if you'll ever get to feel peace like that, let this be your reminder. It's not about who gave it to you. It's about who you give it to now. Tell me in the comments, what does peace look like? Where you are right now? I'd love to know. And as Sophie and I made dinner that evening, her stirring pasta, me chopping garlic, I realized that home wasn't something you inherited. It was something you created. One boundary, one brave decision, one painted star at a time. Summer settled gently over our little corner of the world. Mornings became slower. Sophie spent hours on the swing beneath the mural she had lovingly named "Where the Brave Live." The scent of lavender drifted from the bushes we planted together along the fence line. And inside the house, laughter began to echo more than silence ever had. Some nights I'd wake before dawn, make myself tea, and sit by the window with the soft hum of the neighborhood all around me. Sprinklers ticking, birds stirring, leaves rustling in the breeze. No phones buzzing, no voices raised. Just the kind of stillness I used to think only existed in books. But it was real, and it was mine. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came in moments. Sophie asleep with paint on her fingers, the first meal we cooked in our new kitchen, the quiet satisfaction of paying a bill without asking for help, and the soft closing of a door I never wanted to reopen. I started therapy again. Sophie started painting more. We were healing gently and steadily, not from a single wound, but from a lifetime of bruises that had convinced us love was supposed to hurt. It isn't. And if you're listening to this, wherever you are, whatever your past looked like, please hear me when I say this. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to live a life that feels like your own. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you would name your mural. And if you believe in creating your own freedom, your own peace, subscribe and join us here. Let's keep painting new stories together.